All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to part two of our roundtable discussion hosted by the Journal Record. My name is Russell Ray. I'm the editor of the Journal Record. Again, the topic today is crisis management. In part two, we'll be talking about cyber security, a growing issue across our country in many industries. I spent years covering the power sector. And as you add more sensors and technologies to power plants, the more likely it is that they can be hacked. The same is true for businesses everywhere. As more businesses use more technology, the likelihood of a cybersecurity risk rises. With that, let's go ahead and meet our panel. We'll just go down the line. They'll introduce themselves. Vic, let's start with you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Vic Albert. I'm a lawyer with the Ogletree Deakins Law Firm. We are an internationally based law firm. We're the only law firm in the state of Oklahoma that has an international footprint. And what I mean by that is we have 54 offices in the United States, Mexico, Canada, Europe, and the Caribbean. We have over 950 lawyers. We are 2 emails or 2 phone calls away from any answer you need to a question about cybersecurity. We have lawyers who specialize in cybersecurity, and we offer cybersecurity protection for employers and for businesses so that you can protect your 2 biggest assets, your information and your employees. And so thank you. It's good to be here.
All right. Hey, good morning. My name is Eric Gentry. I'm with the Verizon Threat Research Advisory Center. I'm on the investigative response team. What that means is I'm part of the team that conducts forensic investigations for organizations that get breached. That comprises about 80% of what our team does in any given year is responding to companies that have either just suffered a cybersecurity incident or just finding out that they've been breached. The other 20% of our team's work is really on doing proactive measures. So listening to the earlier panel, I can just think of a lot of analogs to natural disasters within the cybersecurity realm. So thank you for coming, and thank you for having me here today.
Hi, still Taylor Ketchum from earlier. But for me, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but what happens a lot where I come in is social media and your website. What happens when it goes down? What happens when a disgruntled employee does something to your social media channel? What if you get locked out? What if there's a duplicate account that's mimicking the CEO or the president? That's usually where I kind of come in to help you in that area to make sure you're secure. I try to set up things in place so no employees could do anything to hurt your brand when they are on the out of the office, but one of those things is social media security, which is something that 5-10 years ago you probably weren't even thinking about.
Yeah, social media security. 10 years, we wouldn't have known that at all. Dusty Birchfield, Rocky 9 Data Center. We've seen instances being a host of a lot of infrastructure where people have had a variety of attacks, and I'm sure the forensics guys can speak more intelligently to it, but we get the calls, and so we end up being a facilitator of calling the right people, bringing in the right forensics team, or if we need to, attorneys and everything. In the last couple of years, it seems like everybody wants to get paid in Bitcoin. So when they take over everything, so and we've actually helped customers do that, pay off the ransom and get their network back. So it'll be interesting to see where this one goes.
Thank you, Dusty. Please join me in welcoming our panel today. Thank you. Well, Eric, if you don't mind, let's start with you. What types of there are many types of cybersecurity threats, right? And so, what types of threats are organizations facing today?
Well, you're right. There are a variety of threats. In the past, you might have heard about denial of service types of attacks that are still a very valid threat to companies where your systems are being essentially taken out of operation for any normal production. We've seen over the years, though, kind of an advancement from just simply denial of services and continuity to actual attacks against data, attacks against customer data, attacks against proprietary information, intellectual property, attacks against even just the infrastructure itself, being especially in the manufacturing and government sectors, industrial control systems. There's been over the past decade or so or more, there's been definitely an increase in the sophistication of the types of attacks that are occurring out there. One of the big ones today, though, is ransomware. I'm sure everyone has heard about ransomware. It has the ability to affect every industry out there, any company, any organization, any individual, in fact. If you've got an email address or have an online presence in some fashion, chances are you've probably had some kind of ransomware or a phishing email attack, at least had a brush with it, whether you realize it or not. So I think ransomware is probably top of mind these days with regards to organizations, just because it's just so prevalent out there.
Dusty, you have anything to add to that in terms of the different types of attacks that you've seen over your career?
Well, I will lean towards those two guys for the cybersecurity, but denial of service attacks were very, very big. I mean, we've saw those. That's essentially somebody sends a whole bunch of packets to your network all at one time and shuts your network down, or shuts an appliance down, a server or a switch or something of that nature. And if you don't know, you can go to the dark web, or it's really not that dark anymore. You can go to the regular web, and you can buy a denial of service attack on anyone. So I can get a MAC address, which is what all of your devices have. They have a little address that says what they are, how the world knows how to communicate with them. And that's connected to an IP address, which is how the internet works. And I can say, I want to buy a denial of service attack for 5 minutes to shut down your business at your location or your appliance. Did you know you could do that? No, most people don't. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's that easy. And you can pay in cash. You can pay in a wire. You can pay in crypto. Any way you want to pay. And there's organizations that do this for profit. It is big business. I think that's what most people need to know, is that cybersecurity, terrorist-type attacks on our network infrastructure, electrical grid, whatever it may be, is big business for people and organizations all over the world, inside and outside the United States. Everybody wants to believe it's some guy we don't know in some third world country. Well, there are a lot of those. But there's also a lot right here in the U.S. of A. that are attacking us and other people for real profit, whether it's through ransomware or some other type of paid attack. So, perspective.
Good deal. Thank you.
Just to add something to that, ransomware is $1 billion business for the attackers. Billions. So every organization that we encounter, they often have a policy, or at least a public statement saying, we don't negotiate with terrorists, we don't pay ransoms, but yet someone's paying ransoms because the bad guys are making billions off of it.
So to kind of add to that, the threats are external and internal. And what we see in the work that we do for employers is that sometimes an employee will bring that threat into the workplace, even unintentionally. Heard of a situation this week where there was a ransom heisting of a company's information and their computer network, and the target was, it came in through an employee, probably just a administrative type employee is what they suspect, who plugged something into the system, either a hard drive or a thumb drive, or they clicked on an email that they shouldn't have clicked on. So what we see and what we try to do is help businesses protect from those external threats that come in through your people. So we do that through policies, we do that through training, and then we try to underscore some safety layers that you can put into your workplace to keep that friendly fire of external threats from coming into your place of business.
Vic, I think that's a big issue for a lot of the people here. Can you talk specifically about specific policies and rules and procedures that a business or a company needs to have in place to protect from that kind of external threat?
Absolutely. So what we see in this regard is really three very important layers. Number one, you've got to layer your information appropriately. If you thought about it in your workplace or in your business, you probably give access to key information to people who have no business getting that information and no business seeing that information. And so one of the things that we do for companies and businesses is come on board and do an audit. We come in and we interview your HR people and your key management people to find out what are the layers of your information and are you appropriately restricting access. So number one, it's who needs to know it and giving access to those people. Number two, you've got to have the right policies and contracts in place. And in this regard, we're talking about you need a general policy with all of your employees that deals with IT-related situations, that deals with confidentiality of information, and it needs to be across the board. And this is as simple as putting a policy in place and then making sure that your employees know that it's in place so they know the rules of the workplace in that regard. The second part of that is with your key employees, your managers, your key executive suite type people, you need to think about, do you need something stronger? Do you need an employment agreement or a confidentiality agreement, a non-disclosure agreement? Because what happens in this regard that we see kind of taking off from the theme this morning is the tsunami effect. You know, you've seen tsunamis on the news. It's a beautiful place. It's been built. All of a sudden there's this retreat of the water and then this big surprising crash and then a flood that stays around. Well, that's what happens from the internal threats that you have of your information being stolen. You've built it, you've got it, and then all of a sudden somebody leaves and you think everything's going to be fine, and then unknown to you comes this big crash where they've stolen all the information that you thought was yours. And then all the problems just stick around. So what we do is we help employers and businesses put together a structure of contracts and agreements with those key employees about what they can and can't do with your information should they decide to leave. And then lastly, training. If employees and executives know the rules, then they're expected to follow them. Then there can be no innocent, oh, we didn't know that. So we help employers and businesses design training programs to make sure that all of your employees and your executives know what's expected when it comes to IT security and the confidentiality of your information.
And change management, like when people are leaving, like how do you handle that from a social media standpoint and from a process standpoint? I mean, I've got horror stories for days, I guess, but I've literally heard of the IT, not the manager, but one of his employees being let go before they got his access card, right? And the next thing you know, the server room has a liter of Dr. Pepper poured over the top of it. I've seen literally employees grab this server that they've been working on developing for 4 years and remove it from the rack and go out the door with it. So yes, you need to get with them for your processes and just understand what those internal imminent dangers may actually be to be able to make sure that you can manage it. And those were more of the old, and that's why a lot of people end up in a data center. But I'm sure that the social media is probably even worse now from the backlash from employees.
Yeah, so for social media, thankfully there's a few safeguards, but one thing with Facebook is you have a list of people that are admins that are on the page. You could actually get down to just one person, and that person can choose to, oh, I no longer work here, and that page is locked. Unless you have someone that is an agency folk that has some direct contacts at Facebook, because they don't have a phone number you can call, you're locked out of your Facebook page indefinitely until you can find a way to prove that you're back in. I have things in place to help prevent that, but I've seen that happen so many times where it could have been done out of malice, but also innocent. I don't work there anymore. I didn't check to see if there's anybody else that would be an admin there. And then just one quick advice, if can't add too much to the conversation, on social media, when you see those, if you repost this, you're gonna not have your photos sold to Facebook or Instagram. All of those are always fake, every single time. I don't care if you see a celebrity do it, a news anchor do it, they're all fake. So the ones that say, oh, I'm reposting this, so I'm not giving permission, a lawyer said to do this. Lawyer did not say to do that. It's just a hack and it's a hoax. So things like that, just ignore. Same thing with Instagram. Ignore it because all you're doing is feeding into it and causing the algorithm to bring it back up. And you want to see more pictures of puppies and kids, not that stuff. So.
Thank you, Taylor. Eric, who should we be looking out for? Who are the attackers we need to be paying attention to, and who are the victims?
So it depends on the type of attack, of course, but in our experience, in any given year, our team works over 600 forensic investigations on behalf of our customers worldwide. So with that, with that breadth and depth of experience that our team has, we're often in a very good position to see really what's kind of happening out there, and it really is all over the map. We see instances where everything from an employee trying to steal customer information or gain access to intellectual property, already has maybe access to try to capitalize on that, maybe leave for another business, go create his own shop somewhere else, to the other end of the spectrum where we're dealing with very sophisticated state-sponsored actors, as well as very well-funded and well-organized criminal activity. So it really, there's a really wide spectrum there. But then there's also another aspect, and that's your own employees. Your defenses are only as good as the weakest link, right? And oftentimes, especially in some of these more recent types of attacks like ransomware, oftentimes that initial vector is social engineering, like a phishing email. Click on this, click here. Very well crafted, well constructed. And so in that case, it's actually the attack itself may be perpetrated by outsiders, but it's your own employees that end up actually, allowing the incident to occur. So it's dynamic. There's no one size fits all. There's a lot of different threat actors out there that want your data. They want your customers' data. They want your information. There's data that can get stolen from you that you may not even think is important. And then suddenly you're finding that someone has leveraged that information, for their own purposes. So there's just really the landscape of threat actors. We classify them into 3 different categories: outsiders, insiders, and then partners. So that's where you have a vendor that maybe you've outsourced a piece of your environment to, your infrastructure, operations of some fashion, that have access to your most sensitive information, your most important details around your company. And then whether someone goes bad, or which is a less likely event when it comes to partners, because of all those great contracts and NDAs that you've put in place, like Vic was recommending, but rather they basically leave the door open. So they're like, it's maybe the equivalent of inviting a guest to your home, giving them a key and saying, come and go as you please, but just lock up when you leave. And then they don't lock up. And worse, in some cases, from a digital standpoint, they not only don't lock up, but they leave the door wide open. So they pose a risk. That comprises, in any given year, that comprises about maybe 5 to 10% of the threat actors in our data set. But most of it's outside. It's probably about 60, 70% of it's outside. And in any given year, it's 10 to 20% or so for insiders.
Thank you, Eric. Let's talk about logins and passwords. We all have them. We all have many of them. How can a company or a business go about securing these logins and passwords to protect their websites, such as Facebook and LinkedIn and their own company websites? Taylor, can you give us shed some light on that?
Yeah, so I manage probably about 65 social media channels for a variety of folks. And so what I typically do, so Facebook is going to be different. Facebook, you have your own personal profile, and then you can become an admin or an editor for a business profile. That's really nice because I can go in there and I can make sure multiple people, multiple layers, but there's also different levels of what they can do. If someone's an editor on Facebook, they can't get rid of the boss on Facebook. They can only just work to manage the page. So what I typically do is make sure there's at least 2 executives, both the CEO and then typically just someone else there that is an admin on that Facebook page. Even if they never post, they never even log in, it gives me a safe place knowing that they're there. Their employees that maybe I interact with know that the boss has access, wants to be able to control or shut it down if anything should happen. Twitter is a login. You have an email and you have a password. I will suggest do not make that email an employee's personal email, because I mean, we'd like to say we have very loyal employees that will be with us forever, but they may not, and IT may forget to tell you that they're going to shut that down, and all of a sudden you're locked out of Twitter. So really create a general email that's maybe just used for social media networks. That password should be saved. Don't save it on the server, somewhere everybody else can get it. Make sure it's printed and given and put in a couple safe spots. I know I usually keep all of ours in a locked HR drawer for those things. And then same thing with your other platforms. LinkedIn will work similar to Facebook, where you can be an admin of your page. Same thing. Your entire C-suite should have admin access. There's a lot of really cool tools on LinkedIn if you're not using them, if you're an admin, that you can see customers and employees and competition as well. So have that set up where multiple people are admins. But it goes to the old school thing. Don't save your password in your emails. Don't email a password. I cannot believe how many times I've seen a client email me their social media password. I'm like, oh, no, please don't do that again. Let's switch that password now. You should be updating them once a quarter. Please don't have passwords that have your name in it. People are really smart and can guess them. And so have a password updated once every quarter, have it typed up, put it on a document, give it to HR, have it there secure. Maybe that's where they keep the Wi-Fi password for the office. They don't need to be responsible for it. Make sure your social media or communications director is responsible for it, but you should be updating it regularly. But that CEO or the head person in that office also should have a copy with it so they can do something offline if they have to.
I'd like to add something to that, if I may.
Sure.
So, yeah, usernames and passwords are certainly great, and everything that Taylor was saying is absolutely correct. I would just add one more thing to that, especially when it comes to securing your sensitive data. What we often see when we do investigations is that usernames and passwords, even if they're really strong passwords, they can often get compromised. All it takes is one phishing attempt, someone clicking on some email, well-crafted email that directs them to a website that says, hey, you need to reset things, or they trick them basically into entering in those credentials, the username and password. This is not necessarily just for social media credentials, but things for access to your customer database, access to some of the most sensitive areas within your network. So one thing that we've been espousing for years is strengthening that even further, and that's something they call two-factor authentication. So your username and password is one factor, but then you have an external factor. So something that is like a one-time use passcode, or a token that gets generated based off of a random number. So that way, every time that person's logging in, that person not only has to use their username and password or enter that in, but then they also have to get a token. And there's all kinds of great tokenization applications out there nowadays that can really help strengthen, whether you're just logging into your email from home, into your company's email, or if you're logging into your VPN, or if you're logging into some sensitive area within your network. So two-factor authentication often, or the lack of two-factor authentication is often one of the findings when we're doing investigations as something that would have prevented that attack from actually, being perpetrated, or data, being lost. It's that important.
And you can do two-way authentication on social media as well. I have it set up for most of my accounts. You also, once a year, or as much as you want, can actually download all of your social media data. I suggest doing it at least once a year, because what happens if something happens and your Facebook is gone? You can do that for your personal profiles, public business profiles. You don't want to lose those photos that maybe are from your 10 years ago or 5 years ago. It just saves everything, especially if you have a business that uses social media to interact with your consumers. It's a very smart thing to do, and all it is a couple pushes of the button, you download it, push it to the side, don't have to worry about it until you have to worry about it.
So also along those lines, one thing that we've seen from the perspective that we work in this industry is you've got to have some type of policy that prohibits employees from sending to their personal email the things that are work related. Because as I've heard this discussion, you know, one of the things is people will typically send their passwords to their personal email address and think that they're doing a good thing by storing it there. But their personal Gmail address or their Cox.net address may not have those same safety protections that your workplace has. And so now when somebody hacks into their personal email, all of a sudden they've got the way to get into your work emails and your work systems. So you need to have a policy in place from the cybersecurity perspective that tells your employees you are not allowed to send information, not even your passwords or your login information, to your personal emails. And then from the internal threat aspect that I talked about earlier, you've got to monitor what your employees are doing, and if they are sending information from their work emails to their personal emails. You can always identify their personal emails. It has a Gmail or Cox.net or something like that address, an AOL.com address. You need to have a policy in place and you need to police it, because when employees are sending information to their personal emails, it's really not for the benefit of the employer. It's usually for the benefit of the employee. If they need to log in and do work, they need to be instructed to go in through the VPN or through the system you have that has those cybersecurity protections. But you need to closely watch and closely monitor and regulate that your employees are not sending information to their personal emails, because you lose your protection by doing that.
Thank you, Vic. Good information. Anyone guilty of breaking any of these rules? Raise your hand. No, no.
As the lawyer in the group, I'll just tell you, you should consult your lawyer before raising your hand.
All right. Well, let's assume it happens. Let's assume you have been hacked, and I think most of the panel could probably weigh in on this. What should you do if you are indeed hacked? What are the steps that a company or a business or employee supervisor needs to take?
I can take this one. So I'll start for sure. So it really depends on what's been hacked. And I hate to answer a question, with a question or give the typical consultant answer of it depends. But it really does. If you mean, hacked by, hey, I think someone compromised my user account, and if that's the point at which you realize that something bad has happened, good for you, because that's usually compromise of user credentials is often one of those initial links in the chain of events for an attack. So if you caught it at that point, good for you, because you're in a better position than most to be able to limit any kind of damage as a result of the compromise of those credentials. If you learn about you being hacked through maybe reports of fraud or complaints of fraud around your customer data, or maybe there's a posting on in a forum on the dark web where threat actors, bad guys usually, obviously, are trying to sell stolen data. There's an entire online black market, a whole marketplace devoted to buying, selling, and trading stolen data. And that's called generally in the dark web, although there are some clear web forums as well. If you find out about the attack through a media report, reporters in this industry often have very good sources. There's a few out there that are very well known for having their fingers on the pulse when it comes to companies being attacked. And they have their sources. They're monitoring the dark web as well. And so if they pick up on something like that, sometimes your PR or corporate communications director may get a call from one of these reporters and saying, hey, I've got great sources in the underground that says that they've stolen a bunch of data from you, from your company, that you've been hacked, and I'm going to post my story within the hour on my blog, and I'm just really calling you for comment. That is a very realistic scenario for some companies that have been victimized in the past. So what do you do from there? Well, in any of those events, you hopefully are enacting and invoking your incident response plan, because every company has an incident response plan, right? Very well thought out, well planned, well exercised, just like Taylor was mentioning earlier in the earlier panel. You've practiced it, you've exercised it, you've got everything from your executive leadership all the way down to your IT staff and your help desk personnel and everybody in between that's a stakeholder to that process involved, right? So for a lot of companies, that may not necessarily be true. So this is where an incident, a hack, or a data breach, or some other cybersecurity event is not just an IT problem. It's an entire company problem. Everything from public perception, everything from regulatory and legal issues, litigation that may soon follow, to it could be an HR problem as well, depending on the attacker or if it's an insider. And of course, it's a customer problem. So your customers are impacted if it's their data that's been stolen or hacked. So I guess maybe to more directly answer your question, having said all that, is that it really takes a team effort for a company to be able to address that incident. And then there's an incident response process. Contain it. Validating and identifying the problem is step one, but then you have to contain it. You have to make sure you've got your arms around it, that it's not spreading further, that you're able to stop the bleeding, and then start investigating and start restoring your operations and going through all of those processes to really close the loop on all the vulnerabilities.
Thank you.
I was just going to add to that and say it really is a team effort, because as Eric was talking about, you as the company have to look at what was taken, what was breached, what is out there. There are different laws that apply to that. There's federal laws, and then everywhere where your affected people are located, there are state laws. And so what we will do is we will come on board and partner up with a company who's had a data breach, and then we will look at the legal aspects. And then immediately we will recommend to the company to get somebody like Taylor on board so that they can start with the messaging aspects. And as she said earlier, transparency is very important, but sounding the fire alarm is not always necessary. And so it's a matter of what is out there and who needs to know about it and what needs to be done about it in the most efficient, transparent, but not alarming way. And so it truly is a team effort, and deciding who that team is and what you need to do at the very beginning of notice of the breach is important.
I've got a question that didn't come up during our conference call beforehand, but I've read reports of energy companies being hacked through, and all businesses have these second-party and third-party vendors. And I've heard of reports of facilities and companies being infected that way. Is that an issue that business owners and companies need to be very well aware of in order to avoid being hacked? Is that an issue?
Certainly it's an issue. Anytime the businesses team up with other businesses, and I believe Eric spoke about this a little bit earlier, anytime you team up with somebody and you're sharing your ability or your information or access to your information with anyone, and they leave the door open, intentionally or unintentionally, you've now created a problem. So a couple of things there. One, you just have to have really solid relationships and really solid contractual agreements with those entities that you are sharing any access to your company with. And then number two, where there's a need, there's somebody to fill the need. And so there is cybersecurity insurance in the world today. It is just like every other insurance. It has a cost, but it has a benefit, because it will protect everything from the means that you have to take to respond to the crisis, to the repair that you have to do to fix the crisis, to the damage that it could cause out in the industry. And so that's a two-layer way to safety protect yourselves, is to have those right relationships and contracts with your people that you're going to let have access to your system, and then further protect that by having your own cybersecurity insurance and requiring in your contract that they have cybersecurity insurance.
Very good. I know we touched on this a little bit anyway, but let me ask anyway, how can companies prevent and or better prepare for cyber security events? Can I start with you, Eric?
Sure, absolutely. So prevention is obviously the goal, but we also know just from our experience that it's just a matter of time. It's not really a matter of if something's going to happen to you. If you've got a network connection, if you've got a web presence, if you use email, if you have mobile devices, if you are connected to the internet in any way, it's just a matter of time before you encounter something. Whether you get victimized by it or not, whether you catch it in time, whether you defend properly against it, it is a completely different story. But prevention is always the goal for every organization, but also realizing that you're probably never going to be able to prevent everything that's possible that could happen to you from ever happening. So it's, there's a term that we use in the information security industry of defense in depth. There's not a one-size-fits-all. There's not a one product or one solution or one application that can secure everything that needs to be secured. So from a technical standpoint, there's all kinds of great products and controls and systems out there that can help secure your information, but it's also not only not a one-stop shop, it's also not a one point in time and you're done. It's a constant vigilance that has to be applied to it every single day. The bad guys are looking at trying to find vulnerabilities. There's good guys that are trying to find vulnerabilities too. And every time one vulnerability gets addressed, another one arises in its place. It's kind of like the whack-a-mole game. You're never going to be completely secure unless you just turn off the turn off the power, unplug, and no one really wants to do that, right? So the better prepared you are for defending against the various attacks and exercising that constant vigilance against your data, against your infrastructure, even with your own employees, and educating your employees, enlisting their help, especially in these types of ransomware attacks that you heard about in the news and stuff. Most often, the most frequent attack vector is an email, is a phishing email that is designed to elicit a response from them, get them to click on something, get them to open an attachment. So enlisting their help, because they're really on the front lines, educating them, awareness training, getting them to recognize attacks when they happen. But then also incorporating your executive leadership too. One thing that Vic touched on a little bit earlier was having plans in place, policies, procedures, contracts, all of that thing, all of those items. But one trend that we've really seen a lot of, a very positive trend in the last few years, is doing exercises not just at a technical level, but at an executive level, where even outside counsel plays a role in that exercise. Outside PR plays a role. Partners, vendors, everybody plays a role. And there's a lot more awareness nowadays than there was just even a few years ago, and a lot more participation at an executive level. So if you can win your executive team over, get them to understand what the threats are and the risks to the business, and enlist their help in getting those defenses in place. And when an attack occurs, having that plan that can be readily invoked, and that process readily invoked to address that situation makes it easier for the business overall.
And I think a lot of these things, just, as an owner, it gets a little overwhelming, right? It's like, goodness gracious. They told me I got to have a plan for everything, operational for everything, and it does. But the previous panel talked a lot about plans and call trees and suggestions, and a lot of this overlaps, really. I mean, if what we're talking about holistically today is a business continuity plan. So a plan in the event that you are physically impacted or logically impacted, infrastructure, whatever it may be, people impact. It is a whole business continuity plan, and a lot of it overlaps from one to the other. And I would say not all data is equal. You know, if you have pictures of your facility or your employees, you know, if somebody got those, they probably already on the web, right? Obviously, your logins and passwords more important, right? So if you kind of grab pieces that are and put them in a hierarchy of what's most important, then maybe you're a little more vigilant about what matters most. And we see that with our customers, right? So they'll put their most important information in our data center that's SOC 2 Type 2 certified, which is a data center certification, and make sure we're doing all the things we're supposed to protect your information, right? And so they'll put those in the data center behind a firewall, but they may send a bunch of stuff to Google Drive, or they may send a bunch of stuff to a separate Dropbox account or something like that, and delineate a little bit. And as a small business owner, like, sometimes that's got to be good enough. And I got to pick the 5 things that, oh crap, if those get lost, we're really in trouble. And then as it evolves, and as you have time or you have more staff that can support the time, then you start going down the list and being a little bit more restrictive and taking it in pieces. But I know just from example that it can be overwhelming to try to do it all. So I would say high level, put a business continuity plan together, and what's most important, right? Your people. What's next most important? Your data. And then after that, everything else kind of falls, and put hierarchy within those. So if I could send you away with a practical action plan today, which I always like to have on instances like this, is to do that. Just take a piece, pick it once a quarter to start working on that, and then you'll at least have something to work from instead of trying to eat it all at one time, right?
Very good.
I think that's a great point. And picking up on that, one way to easily go back with an action plan and figure out if you have a system that is prone to cyber attack is to do those test emails. You've all gotten them. Some of you have answered them. Some of you shouldn't have answered them. And then you get called by your IT and they say, you should not have clicked on this. That's a breach. Well, if you go back and you send that to the top 5 executives in your business and you see how many of them click on that and do that, now all of a sudden you've done 2 things. One, you know whether anything you've said about cybersecurity and IT protection has taken hold in the workplace. And then 2, you're going to get buy-in from those folks about everything else you want to do to protect cybersecurity in the workplace. So if there's just one thing I could suggest to you from a cybersecurity audit perspective that you go do, talk to your IT people about doing that test email, that test phishing email to your top 5 executives and see how many of them open that email.
I will just say that even if, so say you have a website that's just a landing page, maybe has your locations, doesn't have all the other stuff that could be on there. But you know what? What I've seen happen is for nonprofits, maybe they collect donations. They may not be trying to attack you, but they may have gotten a hold of a bunch of like credit cards, and they're just going to test to see if they work. So you know what? They're going to go to find an easy nonprofit and just start doing tiny donations to see if those cards work. Well, that doesn't work for you guys, and then all of a sudden you have to have a system in place. So there is security things that you can do as a nonprofit, invest just a tiny bit of money to help safely secure. So that's a little bit different than like an e-commerce where you're making a purchase of something at a direct amount. When you're setting yourself up for a little vulnerable situation when you're allowing people to type in how much they want to donate. That's where people can start testing credit cards. So if you don't have a system where people log in to pay their accounts or log in and store information there, but people still use it for other purposes, doing a website audit allows you to look at each page saying, okay, do people give us any type of information? Okay, is that secure? Simple as, do you ask everybody to subscribe to a newsletter? How is that secure? Do you have a notification explaining that what will be sent to them? Little things like that. But my biggest thing is if you do collect donations on any way, making sure you have a really strong system in there that will detect any type of hacker situation. So not just relying maybe on just like a PayPal or something like that. Something a little bit stronger that costs a little bit of money but will really pay off in the end.
All right. Well, for companies and small businesses who don't know where to start, who don't know much about cybersecurity protection, what are some of the resources that now exist to help businesses and companies learn more about the cybersecurity landscape? Eric, can you take that on? Or?
Yeah, sure. And while I'm at it, if you'll forgive me, a shameless plug for a report that we produce every year, have been for the last 12 years. It's called the Verizon Data Breach Digest, or Data Breach Investigations Report, or DBIR for short. We've been publishing that document for, well, this year was the 12th year, and that's something that our team started back in 2008. It offers a lot of great insights into a lot of the things that we've been talking about here on this panel today. The types of threat actors, what's impacting companies. The first couple years that we wrote that report, it was just our data set. And at the time, back in 2008, at that point in time, we'd had about 450 actual breaches that we had investigated for our customers that I think made it statistically relevant for us to produce a report, to take a look at it. What's really happening? What are those chains of events that lead to an attack happening, lead to a breach of data? And then starting, I think, in year 3, we started partnering with the U.S. Secret Service. We started getting a lot of other contributors. So this year, I think we had 73 contributors to the report. That includes even some of our competitors. It includes certs from the U.S. cert, in fact, and other government and country certs as well. Law enforcement agencies, IT security products. So everybody out there is collecting data around really what's happening. So we had 73 contributors that sent their data into us, normalized it with our processes, and published that report. So we've got 12 years of reporting and about 16 years now worth of data over those past 12 years. And it provides a lot of good insights. There's that. There's our Data Breach Digest, which is where the DBIR is more a lot of pie charts and bar graphs, a lot of statistics. The Data Breach Digest is more of a case study. So it's a much easier read and something that I would recommend that you look at. We've made all of our reports free since day one. It's a great marketing tool for us, for sure, but there's also a reason for it, and that truly is to get the word out in the industry for what's important. How can companies, understand what risks they face? And then if you look at those reports, you can probably pretty easily figure out what your pain points are for your business, regardless if you're a small business, a large multinational corporation. So incorporate that into your risk management process. Look at other online resources. The U.S. CERT, and there's another site called NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, has fantastic resources around how, various standards that they've built. So best practices really around what you can do to, create a cybersecurity program in your company, how you can better secure. So there's all kinds of great resources out there that can really help you get started.
I would say ask your vendors, your carrier, Verizon, Cox, AT&T, they're going to have some input. Ask your attorney. Ask your managed service provider. At Rapid 59, we've got a slew of managed service providers that actually have offices in our campus next to the data center. They are spectacular resources. They're the ones that usually show up when your CEO's desktop doesn't work, if you don't have an on-staff IT person, right? And whoever's providing a lot of those IT-related services have an opinion. And they can at least help you direct. Again, I like to grab things in small pieces. They can at least direct you to say, hey, this is an appliance or this is a solution that you could implement today, and then let them help you build on it. But your vendors are seeing this way more than your organization, or if you have one or two IT individuals, they need some help. And if you just ask, usually they'll help you with some type of free reporting or resource or whatever it may be, or some sort of audit, so that you can at least make an assessment, so we can take it in pieces and start knocking down these potential issues.
From the perspective that I talked about, from the internal threat that you have with your employees and the people in your workplace, our firm does a lot of work in this regard, and so we have resources online on our website. And then here in Oklahoma City, we're going to make part of our annual employment seminar a update of cybersecurity audit checklists, and then how to safeguard your workplace internally. That seminar is on September the 24th. It's free. It's here in Oklahoma City. There's some invitations up here. We certainly invite anybody from your workplace to come and attend. But we provide those type of tips and safeguards for internal threats on our website.
Eric, we have no problem with shameless plugs because I'm about to give one. I want to remind everybody about our Energy 4.0 Forum and Energy 4.0 Forum and Awards coming up on December 5th. If cybersecurity, if digital solutions is a big interest of yours, you'll want to attend that event December 5th in the Devon Tower. Sean Trotsky, the President, CEO, and Chairman of OG&E, and Dave Hager, the President of Devon Energy, will be our keynote speakers. Mike Ming, the former Secretary of Energy for Oklahoma, will be moderating our panel discussions. That event will be focusing on digital solutions being used in power generation and in the oil and gas field. So I hope you'll join us for that. Vic, Eric, Taylor, Dusty, thank you so much for your time. Please put your hands together for our fantastic panel. Thank you, folks. We are adjourned.